Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. It's the Cargo Cats podcast. I'm Carrie Cat 1, and I'm joined with Noelle Cat 2, and we've got a stray cat that has joined us today, Laura, First Officer with ABX Air. Laura, what kind of show do we have today?
Today we have a special guest coming from Madrid, Spain. We have Guillermo Ochovo with us today. He's here with Cargo Facts Consulting. Hi,
Awesome.
Guillermo. How are you?
Hi, everyone. Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here with us today.
Welcome.
Do you
Thank you very
mind
much.
giving us a brief introduction of yourself and just a summary of what Cargo Facts Consulting does?
For sure. So thank you again for having me on the podcast. It's an honor to be here. So my name is Guillermo, and I am the director of Cargo Facts Consulting. I've been with the company for just over 9 years now, contributing to the firm's portfolio of industry reports, analysis, presentations, and events. And Cargo Facts Consulting is an aviation advisory firm in the air freight industry. We've been in the industry since 1978, and we provide insights and strategic guidance to all stakeholders across the air logistics sector. So that includes airlines, OEMs, service providers, express companies, and we are focused on digital innovation, strategic planning, and growth management. So again, very happy to be here and part of the podcast today.
I guess my first question would be is how hard is it gathering this data and making these projections, in this market space?
So great question there, especially now this year because
Since
gathering
COVID and
data.
et cetera, et cetera.
I think actually when we go back to COVID, obviously was a very challenging time. But I think we've actually seen more uncertainty in between Q1 and Q2 so far of 2025 than what we saw actually back in 2020 and 2021 with COVID. So gathering this data and making projections in the air cargo industry is very complex because the cargo industry is very dependent on market volatility, geopolitical influences, and trade, and that is very different than the passenger industry. We believe it is a lot harder to predict what's going to happen in the cargo space versus the passenger space, even in the long term. But despite these challenges, we have experiencing on employing different advanced analytical tools and methodologies to provide the most accurate forecasts and data insights. So we monitor market trends every day, regulatory changes every day, and we make sure that we are up to date on all the different technological innovations to ensure that these projections that we make are both relevant and reliable for the customers that we work with.
Okay. Well, without further ado, could you roll right into a brief presentation that might be able to explain to our listeners exactly how you roll this information out into the cargo industry?
For sure, yeah. And we'll go ahead and get started with the general state of the market. So, as you know, the air cargo industry right now is experiencing very a lot of dynamic shifts, and that is influenced by especially the geopolitical and trade tensions, as well as regulatory changes and also e-commerce growth. So let's look into some of these. And what we're trying to answer here is, given the current market volatility, can we still expect growth in 2025? So back when we were doing our projections in January, beginning of the year, we were looking at a 4 to 5% growth, but with everything that has happened in the industry and in the world in the last 3 months, is that still the estimate? So let's look into that. So this chart actually shows global air cargo traffic growth all the way from the 1980s to the most recent year, 2024. So as you can see, in the last few years, we have had a lot of volatility, and that was mainly due to COVID. So we started 2020, obviously due to COVID, we had a bad year, almost 10% decline. One actually, we had a great year of growth, almost a 19% there. We had a couple of more of weaker years, but last year was actually a great year for cargo. We were able to reach growth of over 11%, and this was measured in freight ton kilometers. So now what's going to happen this year? Our previous estimate was that we were still going to see the cargo market grow from a 4 or 5% baseline, but we have since revised those estimates, and we believe that that is still going to grow, but it is going to be lower than that. So we estimate a 1 to 2% growth by the end of the year. As you can see, there are signs already that the industry is slowing down in 2025. So we've seen a lot of front loading consumer behavior, and that means that we've seen shippers and companies trying to book shipments and to transporting shipments before a lot of the new regulatory changes and tariffs were coming into place in April and May. So that has helped. We've seen some growth in the first 3 months of the year. Also, fuel prices are down, which is always a good thing for the operating costs of airlines and carriers out there. But we've seen also how these numbers are much different than what we were seeing back in 2024. So we're starting to see weaker numbers and declines across many of the key metrics there. One important point that I also wanted to mention is how we've seen since 2022, we saw how capacity was outpacing demand for cargo. And that is very important when we look at cargo yields, as well as overall revenues for airlines and how activity will play out. Well, we saw a great year in 2024, and that was also due to actually demand outpacing capacity. But we've seen that trends reversed again in early 2025, and we are at the situation right now where capacity is outpacing demand again. So there's more available capacity than demand to fill this capacity in this case. Now, if we look at just to finish this question and just give you an overview on the fleet, we need to remember that even though 2025 we're still seeing a lot of moving pieces, geopolitical tensions, and maybe we're going to see a weaker year for cargo, the long-term game looks very positive. This chart actually shows the freighter fleet development over the last 10 years, and it shows that across the three main segments: narrow bodies, medium wide bodies, and large wide bodies. And as you can see, in the last 10 years, the freighter fleet has grown by 600 units. So even though the last year, 2 years, we've seen flat growth in terms of aircraft entering the space or the fleet, we know that the long-term game is that this fleet will continue to grow over time, and we'll be showing later some more data on that. But that summarizes what the state of the industry is as of today.
So all in all, you would say that there's a growth trajectory within medium and wide body aircrafts.
That is correct.
That's good news.
And do you see it
Yeah.
kind of trending that way too in the future? for
That
wide
is
body.
correct. And let me,
Yeah.
yes. And that goes because, again, we're looking at a long-term trend here. So we need to look into not only the aircraft that are ready and that are in order, but also what the demand out there is. And if we look at the aircraft backlog, I wanted to just show you this chart that shows the total number of aircraft order as today, and these are firm orders. These do not include options. So as you can see, we are showing a steady supply of aircraft in the short term. And if actually you look at the aircraft and the first 6, 7 aircraft types, you will see that all these aircraft are actually in the large and medium wide body space. Right now, we are still in a situation of lack of capacity across the wide body space. And that is obviously why we are seeing this high number of aircraft in the backlog for the segment. There is a big need for medium wide body types as well as large wide body types. You can see the 777 conversions, the 777 factory freighters, also the 767s, both converted and production freighters, as well as the A330s coming into the market. Overall, actually 66% of those are in the large wide body space, with about 29-30% of the remaining being in the medium large wide body space. So definitely a steady pipeline of demand for both medium and large wide bodies.
So for some of our viewers here, when you're flying as a passenger, for those of you who don't know, and just on a regular, commercial flight, let's say to LA or Disney World or wherever you're going, besides your bags and all the passengers you're flying with, you don't know really what's underneath the belly of your plane. Like there's tons of, cargo all the time that's being transported underneath you. So you could be flying with yourself, your kids, your family, your luggage, and I don't know, a bunch of canned goods or Oreos
Flowers,
or flowers or whatever. But anyway, how much of growth do you think is going to go just to passenger belly freight?
So that's a great question, because we look at passenger belly freight, and that is still a very critical component of the air cargo ecosystem. If we think about how much cargo is being carried across passenger versus main deck dedicated freighters, we see that it's a 50-50. Back, if we go back a few years ago, right after the pandemic, the share of main deck freighter cargo was much higher than belly cargo. However, in the last few years, we've seen more passenger capacity entering the market, and obviously that has had an impact on the belly cargo share versus main deck freighter. We believe that both main deck and belly and belly cargo are going to continue to compete. We know that belly holds account for that significant portion of air cargo capacity, especially for any type of the major wide body transatlantic, trans-Pacific, Europe to Asia. But it is also important to remember that main deck freighters and freighters are needed to carry a lot of the commodities that go trans-Pacific, transatlantic, Europe to Asia. So both are going to grow. We believe that the share is going to remain about the same, with slightly larger for the main deck freighter side. So we predict that in the next 20 years, if right now is at 50-50, it will likely go up to 54-55% for the main deck, and it will be reduced on the belly. The reason why that will happen is there's going to be retirements for a lot of passenger aircraft that have larger belly holes than the ones that are coming into the markets. You will see that there is a passenger A321 XLRs that are replacing 767s, A330s over the Atlantic. That is something that we need to factor into our forecasts, as there's not a lot of belly space on those aircraft, and that will definitely have an impact, a positive impact for main deck freighter operators when it comes to that main deck freighter share growth.
Okay, that's good for us.
Yes, it is.
Are you seeing a lot of newcomers into the air freight market, and do they last?
Yes, so the air freight market is actually witnessing the entry of new players. We've seen companies like Shein and Temu that are impacting the air cargo market, and they're consuming large amounts of aircraft space, and that has led to increased freight rates and competition for capacity. But in the topic of e-commerce, we do have some more to show you, and actually I wanted to go over to this chart here that shows global e-commerce revenues and how they are distributed across the different countries. And as you can see, China, the US, and the EU are the three main markets, the more popular markets there. Global e-commerce, we're talking about a market that is about $6.3 trillion as of today, and it will reach $8 trillion by 2028. So we are seeing a market that continues to grow. And the key message, the key point to make here is that we estimate that between 21-22% of global air cargo volumes are actually linked to e-commerce. 10 years ago, this number was actually zero. So the growth of e-commerce has really helped drive the growth of air cargo, and that is significant for a lot of the growth that we've seen over the last 5 to 7 years in the market. A lot of these, and this goes into some of the e-commerce changes that we are seeing in the US. And some of you might have heard about de minimis, and de minimis is essentially a regulation that allows any parcel, any shipments entering the US that are valued at less than $800 to actually enter the US with no taxes or duties. And if you look at the chart that I'm showing here, you can see how back in 2016 that threshold was actually $200, and that was actually increased to $800 in 2017. And you can see what the exponential growth of e-commerce and de minimis volumes has been in the US. Last year, we actually saw around 1.1 billion shipments coming into the US. And again, 80% of these shipments were entering the US via air. So definitely it's been a major drive for growth, especially on the Trans-Pacific market and within the US for US domestic. The growth of e-commerce has really transformed the US in the last 10 years. So that shows a little bit on the latest effects on e-commerce and what the discussions around de minimis have been so far.
So as we shift to talking about this subject, are we talking about tariffs? Can we shift and talk about the tariffs and how, that's affecting ACMI and e-commerce as well?
Yes. So a very important point. Yes. So we just talked about de minimis, which is a very specific regulation or an exemption for all these low value items or imports that are entering the US. But the other factor is tariffs. So in the last 2 to 3 months, we've seen a lot of changes here. Mm-hmm. And these two, tariffs and de minimis, they've introduced a lot of complexity for ACMI operators and e-commerce businesses. So these changes are leading into increased costs, logistical challenges, especially for those operators in the ACMI business and that work or that serve e-commerce companies such as Amazon in the US. So we've seen already air cargo shipments from Asia, East Asia, specifically China and Hong Kong, to the US dropping significantly. And we've seen a lot of operators being affected by tariffs. We've seen lower volumes on the Trans-Pacific. We've seen lower volumes even in the domestic US. And that is actually affecting and impacting all these different operators. Now, as I was looking into all these data last week, everything has changed as of the last couple of days. Now, all the different tariff impacts and the tariffs that were imposed between China and the US are currently on hold for the next 90 days. So again, there's a lot of moving pieces here, and it is very hard to predict what is going to happen. However, the impact has been significant so far on some of these operators, and that's something that they felt with a reduced amount of volumes and shipments into the US.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that the geopolitical landscape is, really kind of controlling all of this. We see President Trump is in the Middle East right now. Taiwan was here just about 2 months ago. Can you talk a little bit about, U.S. companies that are going to be bringing manufacturing back to the United States and how that may affect the global air freight, market and demand? And do you anticipate that increasing the domestic air freight?
Great point. So one of the things that I would like to also mention here is we're seeing that China and the US want to rely less on each other, right? And before I go into the domestic numbers, there's a chart that I wanted to also show the audience here, and that's how we've seen a lot of supply chain diversification. So when we look at the US, yes, we've seen a lot more nearshoring and friendshoring, but we've also seen other countries that have increased their air cargo tonnage into the US over the last few years. So in this case, as we all know, there's winners and losers, and one of the winners here from the US relying less and less on China is actually Southeast Asia. And as you can see on the right side, the second chart here, we've seen how countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, or the Philippines have increased their air cargo tonnage into the US over the last 5 years by triple digits. And that is an important metric here because first, it positions Southeast Asia as essential players in the global logistics, but it also boosts how all these imports are coming into the US. So maybe we'll see less trade from China or other countries, but we will be able to see more from some of these other countries like the ones that I was showing earlier. Now, you were asking about the impact of US manufacturing reshoring on air freight, and obviously it is going to influence domestic air freight patterns. And even though the US might reduce the reliance on international shipping, that is likely going to lead to an increased demand in domestic air freight because production and consumption will align more closely within the US, and we do expect that the domestic US market will continue growing even at a faster rate if these trends of reshoring back to the US are effective over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So the term that you guys, the professionals, like to use is feedstock, and that describes passenger planes that can be later converted into cargo use, basically. So Guillermo, what's the prognosis for feedstock in the future for wide bodies? And how does the Boeing 787 factor in that it's not being able to be converted?
Right. So great question here. If we focus on the medium and the large wide body, we've seen we are actually seeing a problem, and we're very concerned about these two segments because there is lack of options in the market. I was showing earlier a few minutes ago on how 70-80% of the orders in our freighter backlog are actually medium and large wide bodies. So there is really a need for these. But there's also a lack of options, and there's two reasons for these. If we look at the A330, for instance, we see how conversions are rising, but the 767, which has been the backbone of the medium wide body fleet over the last couple of decades, the conversions there are slowing down due to feedstock shortages. Right now, there is not too many options for feedstock, also because passenger airlines are keeping those airplanes and flying them until the end of their useful life. So really, with no announcement on a 787 conversion or the future dominance, the A330 will be leading conversions over the next decade, even though feedstock is still going to be an issue. As you know, you've seen the OEMs, Boeing and Airbus, delaying their deliveries on the passenger side and going through issues with engines and with supply chain disruptions. That is going to continue. Tariffs has not helped in all these situation. And if we look at the large wide body, actually we have three 777 conversion programs in the space right now, but feedstock is very constrained. We have counted about 100 orders for those so far, but those orders were mostly made in 2021 and 2022 when the market for passenger feedstock was great. Now it is a lot harder to get a hold of a 777 passenger airplane to be converted onto freighters. Passenger lease rates and passenger market values for passenger aircraft are very high, and it is very hard to justify a conversion and very hard to justify making money on a converted freighter in the medium or large wide body space there. So that's where we are in terms of feedstock for the medium and the large wide body side.
Okay. Did you guys have any other questions on tariffs or anything like that before we moved forward? Or
No, I think he
covered.
I think he definitely has covered
okay, great.
how that's going to affect the marketplace.
Guillermo, what do you think about some of the ACMI companies going private through acquisitions such as Atlas and say TSG?
Right. So the trend of ACMI companies going private, we've seen the case of Atlas and ATSG with Apollo and Stone Peak. We believe that is showing a shift towards long-term investment and operational flexibility. And we understand that while such transitions may raise some concerns among employees, they often lead to enhanced resources and stability in the evolving air cargo landscape. So at the end of the day, we believe that the reason why, or what we're seeing, these shift towards long-term investment is actually very positive for ACMI companies in the long term. We predict and our outlook is that it is going to make them stronger in the long term, and we are going to see growth across ATSG, across Atlas, and maybe some of the others that will have that future outlook as well.
Our company was affected by that. We were recently acquired by Stone Peak and that merger, and we fully support that merger. However, you did mention sometimes there's employees that kind of feel wary about that, of new private equity acquisitions, but just for fear of change alone. But how do you feel that ATSG might look in a few years?
Yeah, so I think that following the acquisition by Stone Peak, I think ATSG is in a great place to leverage that increased capital and that strategic direction to make the position or ATSG position a lot stronger in the air cargo sector, especially in the domestic US. And again, while there might be some organizational changes that occur, I think the focus here remains solid. I think ATSG is on the right path for sustaining growth and adapting to all the market demands. And I believe that ensures a very robust company for the future here. So again, evolving to the market demands is key, and it really positions that company to continue providing aircraft leasing, comprehensive aircraft leasing with a growing portfolio and operating solutions to all the different customers.
Okay,
Awesome.
that's good to hear.
Yeah, you've given me hope, and I'll continue to order on Shein and Temu.
Yes, please. We should all do that.
My husband will be happy to hear that.
It's a good deal.
I don't need any more packages showing up at the front door, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless it's Amazon. They have a
And
great
Amazon,
return
let's
policy.
let's not forget about the domestic US and Amazon and how big of a role they play in domestic US distribution for e-commerce.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to add about Cargofax and their services and maybe even their conventions?
Yeah, so we actually have we host 4 events every year. ATSG has been part of those, and we really appreciate the support on sponsoring and speaking at those. So it's always great to have ATSG, to have ABX being represented there. You're always invited to come to those. Our next one will be the Cargofax Symposium in Nashville. It's the 22nd of October through the 24th. So we're very excited to move to Nashville. We've been hosting this event in San Diego for the past few years, but we expect a great turnout for Nashville later this year. And yeah, you're all invited, and I hope to see you there.
Oh, awesome.
I'm-
Road trip.
I've already packed my cowboy boots. I'm ready to go.
We'll see you there.
Yeah.
We'll brush up on our line dancing.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks. I know you're several hours ahead, but we appreciate you taking time out to answer these questions and just kind of have a conversation about
Yeah.
the geopolitical landscape and what the cargo industry landscape is going to look like. And
Yeah, that was
Moving
very
forward.
informative. Thank you very
Yeah,
much,
thank you.
Guillermo.
thank
for
you
your
very,
time.
very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Remember-
for the opportunity.
And sorry about that. Remember, you can catch us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Like, subscribe, and share. And remember to keep it safe.
Reliable.
And on time.
Don't forget to smash that like button.